Good morning, everyone. We heard a lot just now about what's going on in the market and trends that are going to drive M&A. I think we're going to take a big step back and just say, who's going to win in 2023? What does winning mean in 2023? Who are going to be those category killers? And we could just all say it's Flutter and go home, but I think there's a lot more to it than that. I think there's a lot more about product, about markets opening up, about getting the customer in the right place where everyone has compliance in their minds. You know, we're in the entertainment business, let's never forget that. So I think we'll start off just talking about what definitions of success are. And I'm going to start off with Kai, if you wouldn't mind. Kai, what's success to you?
Success. So I think one of the biggest challenges we face as an industry, and we've seen across the board, is cost of user acquisition, right? It's just exorbitant. And I think when we, as a venture fund, early stage venture fund, look at what is the next phase of growth and opportunities to continue growth sustainably in the industry, it's how do you drive down that CAC cost? And so we think about the world of gaming, not just in sports betting, but sweepstakes, opening up national audiences. You know, there was a lot of talk about regulation in the last panel. I think there's an interesting opportunity for products that are skill-based to open up that top of funnel and then continue to convert those users in. We saw that happen with DFS into gambling. We see other innovative products in the market, right? So it's not only about the regulatory framework with which these games of scale or sweeps operate, but it's also introducing new experiences, right? I invest in a lot of gaming, traditional gaming. You look at, companies that came from the gaming space, a Playtika going and acquiring Seriously, right? Progression-based mechanics that are now, leaking into those games, right? And so I think when we talk about what are the types of products you can offer to innovate top of funnel, what does that regulatory framework look like, and then what are you building around that to continue to drive conversion? Those types of products, those types of businesses that spur growth in the industry. And we're always looking for category expanding, market expanding opportunities when we invest. And I think those are some of the most interesting opportunities this year. Fantastic.
So omnichannel is something you believe in?
It is, yeah.
Fantastic. Great. Lloyd, what's the success mean for 2023 for you?
I think any definition of long-term success has to incorporate producing sustainable and recurring free cash flow. An asset is worth no more, no less than the net present value of its discounted future cash flows. And if there are no such cash flows, it is hard to ascribe significant value to that asset. But to answer maybe a bit more qualitatively, I think that B2C operators in this space succeed if they know their customer and deliver a product mix and user experience to that customer that simultaneously maximizes profitability and customer satisfaction, which are often a bit in tension. I think that's what great consumer brands do. They allow their core user base to efficiently and reliably convert money into utility, and that is especially so in the entertainment and the gaming space. And so I think what we will see, and what we arguably have already begun to see, is operators attempting to assemble for their audience the optimal flywheel or combination of offerings, all of which are characterized by providing negative expected value but positive expected utility, and catering to the user who enthusiastically trades their money for experiences, who psychologically classifies their deposits as entertainment expenses, not as capital investment from which to earn an ROI. From a qualitative perspective, I think those are the companies who will succeed, the ones who provide and assemble the optimal combination of offerings under the umbrella that I like to refer to as competitive entertainment. But to Kai's point, it's all about adjacent verticals, expanding the TAM. We're all quite familiar with the astounding customer acquisition spending, and presumably the operators spend so much with an LTV in mind that justifies that CAC. But if you can expand that LTV dramatically by being the one-stop shop for blank, which the blank depends a bit on your particular customer base, I think companies that succeed in that will be the ones that also succeed in producing reliable and recurring free cash flow.
I think you see that in retail as well, don't you? I mean, you see if you're giving people value for their money, then people come back. if people feel they're getting burned, whether it's a RTP on a slot machine or whatever else, time value for money, I think, is one of the key metrics that I see in successful businesses, certainly on the other side of the Atlantic. So it'd be great to see that over here as well.
And I think that people, myself included, are very lazy. And so if you provide them with an experience and then a convenient on-ramp to pursue an adjacent or similar experience that also appeals to them without having to log out, log back in, change devices, change venues, what have you, the removal of friction and the removal of decision fatigue in the user journey can be quite useful in expanding average revenue per monthly user or LTV or whatever your metric of choice is.
Fantastic. Seth, some words from you.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Well, that's better. So I don't think success is so binary. I don't think there's just simply winners or losers, but it's very much based on the perspective and expectations of the person asking that question. For example, was Contessa more successful than you, Paul, for having more people in the audience, or is the quality of our audience better than Contessa's? So, you know, I think I agree with what the panelists have said, and I can definitely go into more detail around the importance of providing a good experience. I happen to have done that pretty successfully offline, and figuring out how to do that online, I think, will be a big part of people's success.
Fantastic.
I would just add to Seth's point, you look at brick and mortar casinos, in Las Vegas in particular, but also worldwide, they are arguably some of the most fine-tuned cross-selling machines in the history of mankind. You go to play blackjack and you walk away purchasing a spa treatment and a dinner and a few beers at the bar and whatnot. And the big question is, how do you replicate that digitally, which, to Seth's point, is a bit more challenging, or at least has not yet been solved to the degree that we have seen in brick and mortar properties.
I have some ideas, but I'll save it for later.
Fantastic. Chris, profitability, free cash flow, are these things that we should care about?
Yeah, I guess that's the easy answer. But, you know, look, success today means something different than it meant 48 hours ago before Jerome Powell spoke, and it certainly means something different than 18 months ago, right, before the market really changed its definition of success to what you just said. I think the market, certainly the public markets, have become focused on profitability to a fault, right, where we only define successful businesses as those that are going to generate positive EBITDA by the end of the year. You know, when I think about it, I take a longer-term view, and I break it down to the simplest form of success is, are you able to generate organic demand for your product? And, you know, I think when people ask that question, you know, they think about it in the context of B2C companies. And they say, well, you know, FanDuel can do that, DraftKings can do that. But the list gets very short. And, you know, I think if you look at the representation of people at this conference, there's a lot more than just B2C companies here. And I see a lot of successful companies in the B2B space that generate organic demand for their content, for their products that they're producing, right? I don't think anyone here would argue that GeoComply is not a successful company. And, you know, I think as this industry expands and evolves, we just need to broaden our scope of, you know, the companies that we look at, the companies that we define as successful, and realize that demand is being generated across this industry in different ways.
I completely agree. I think if you look at the industry through that narrow B2C lens, I think you're missing 90% of what's there. I think there's so much more around customer experience, game development, all of these pieces where, you know, you're starting to see, you know, for instance, Aristocrats just launching an Axie. That's going to make an enormous difference to the digital slot floor, because they take up, what, 60% of the slot floor here at the moment in a retail environment? All of these things are going to change the industry, I think, very dramatically over the next 6, 12, 9 months. And I think we'll see it, you know, come through in a very different way to what people are expecting right now. So with that in mind, from my perspective, I think who's going to be successful? You know, I touched on Flutter flippantly, but clearly they've been the winner of 2022. They know what they're doing. They've got a phenomenal machine, and they're operating, you know, at levels way beyond everyone else. But who else? Who else, Chris, can you see as being offering that right combination?
Yeah, I mean, look, I take it back again, removing it from the B2C context, focusing more on the B2B, and I see a lot of really exciting game studios. I know Play and Go is here. Play and Go's very quickly inserting themselves into the U.S. market in a big way. A studio like High Five has been successful for years, producing quality content. So I think you can be successful at a smaller scale in the B2B context, right, which creates the opportunity for smaller businesses to really insert themselves and carve out a niche.
And in terms of customer acquisition, where do we look for that for success?
Customer acquisition, I'm not going to name specific companies, or else I'm just going to go through my portfolio, so I'll spare you all going through that. But when I think about which industries within the real money gaming ecosystem are going to win, I completely agree. Compliance, KYC, geolocation, critical components for continued and sustained growth. When I look at the lotto space, it's an area that we love. It's a massive, offline, retail-driven business. But what types of products you can create and what types of gaming experiences with tactile feedback, with haptic feedback, right, with making it a more social experience, right? The last panel, we talked a lot about social experiences. That's something today that most people, unless there's a $500 million plus jackpot, people at the office might go out and play together. The opportunity to kind of develop pools and bring people in and participate in ways that you saw DFS be social. I think Lotto has a lot of the same underpinnings that can really make it a social experience. And I think, alternative form of entry is a particularly interesting part where we're going to see a lot of growth, right? Sweeps is one example of that. But alternative form of entry, when you look at ad-supported models, when you think about bringing in new audiences, to me, those are incredibly compelling. Because if you look at the industry from the gaming perspective, pure play, kind of console, going into PC and then going into mobile, you saw $60 retail games go to Facebook, microtransactions at $3, to free-to-play with in-app purchase. And I think what we're going to see over a course of 6 or 7 years is as games become more innovative, as progression-based mechanics are introduced, as alternative forms of entry are introduced, you're going to grow that TAM substantially. And those are very much driven by gaming innovation. And what I'm fascinated with is when you look at the major folks like the Take-Twos and the EAs of the world who have sports franchise games, you're seeing the leagues become receptive. You're seeing states become receptive. When and at what point in time are individuals who are playing Madden or 2K going to be able to completely frictionlessly open up their console and play and wager on those games, right? We still have a lot of growth because we're not yet integrated into existing gaming ecosystem, which is another $200 billion industry. When the merger of those two things happens and we see the innovation in gameplay, that's where real opportunity for this industry to grow in a substantial way comes into play.
Hey, Kai brought it up. I didn't want to be the guy to bring up esports, but look, I think that's a good example. There are no silver bullets, right? But in my opinion, esports is a bullet, one that certainly I've spoken about going on 8 years now. But there's been a tremendous amount of progress and success in the background, even though I can't name a peer-to-peer company that has extreme financial success. For example, in the state of Nevada, we've gone from a regulatory environment where 7 years ago the regulators didn't know what esports was, and it was upon some of us to educate regulators, to today where we've just passed regulation that allows for casinos to take wagers on esports, which is the first step. The second step is the peer-to-peer betting that Kai described. The other thing that happened that a lot of people don't realize is the Gaming Control Board started the Esports Technical Advisory Committee, and that's not just made up of operators like myself, but it actually has game publishers. Activision, Blizzard, and Ubisoft sit on that board. So a couple years ago, we couldn't ask ourselves, are the game publishers, does Take-Two even want betting? And I think there's now a clear definitive answer that at least many of the major publishers do want it. So as we see the lines blur, between gambling and gaming. It is so obvious that that is the future. Maybe some people invested a little too early. There's a little bit of investment fatigue. But I will stake my reputation that at some point we're sitting here and seeing a lot of financial success around it.
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say the audience is still very young, right? It's a massive audience, and so when you see where are the pockets and where the dollar is going to come from, right? Are you of age to gamble, right? So the numbers are there, the engagement is there. I think what makes it exciting is this is the first time to grow esports from $1 billion industry and actually grow the TAM in something that people really want. But timing the market is everything, and that's going to be the most challenging part.
And look, esports is sexy, right? But like you mentioned something that's not so sexy, which is lottery. And I think it's easy to overlook the fact that lottery is the biggest form of gaming in the US, and it's also probably the most antiquated. And there are some businesses, Jack Pocket's here, a great example of one that's disrupting that industry in a big way. And when you can see a convergence between lottery and some of these newer forms of gaming that we're seeing here in the US, I mean, that's a huge, huge opportunity that's totally untapped today.
I was going to add, I think there is an aspect of the social point that is frequently made, but perhaps a bit underappreciated in how much more of a sticky, retentive experience can be created if you properly leverage or exploit the social dynamic. You guys can all do a quick audit of your own personal consumptive lives and imagine that if you only have Netflix and all your friends only have Hulu, you won't be able to talk about the same shows. You only have Instagram, all your friends have TikTok, you won't be able to share content. You only have Xbox, all your friends have PlayStation, you won't be able to play Madden and FIFA and other EA Sports titles against each other. And yet, if you have FanDuel and all your friends have DraftKings, for the most part, you can place the same bet at the same odds and go to the bar together and have a seamless social experience. And so I think that figuring out how to replicate that social network effect that really drives stickiness and retention, that gives someone incremental value for patronizing the platform that all of their friends patronize, is something that we've seen a lot of attempts at, but not yet an extraordinary degree of success. And then I was also going to mention it was gracious of Kai to not plug his portfolio companies, but I'll plug two of them since they're in my portfolio as well. He mentioned lottery. We're both investors in Jackpot. Chris roughly referenced the numbers. Americans buy over $100 billion of lottery tickets per year, and up until very recently, that was all done via the extremely archaic process of driving to a gas station or walking to a bodega and buying that ticket manually. I think it's quite easy to see how a digital transformation would completely disrupt that industry. The other one we're in together is Players Lounge, which is the peer-to-peer esports or video game wagering platform. And not only do they allow you to get paired up with someone who you can play in Madden for $100 or something like that, you can actually play against the computer in Call of Duty, and they'll give you a line. Will Kai kill over 7 people? Will he inflict over 2,000 damage? Will he place in the top 10 in this match? And it still is a young audience. It still is relatively underdeveloped. But when you talk about expanding the TAM, expanding into adjacent verticals, finding ways to create meaningful market share, even as the top real money gaming operators seem to have absorbed the majority of it, it's areas like the digification of lottery, like instituting technology platforms to allow people to wager on their own video game performance, that I think will provide a lot of the largest outcomes over the next 3, 5, maybe 10 years.
I think that's really interesting. I think the open secret is that there isn't a unique product in the industry on the traditional gaming front. It's all the same slot providers. Table games haven't changed in 150 years. So all you're really doing is competing on the basis of what? Bonusing, which seems to be going completely and utterly out of hand, and user experience. So the second you can bring in a different product, whether that be what's going on with horse racing over here at the moment, whether that be something with esports, it gives you an edge. It gives you a reason for people to come to play with you rather than someone else. I think that's got to be a key element of success.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I operate casinos in Las Vegas, arguably the most competitive gaming jurisdiction in the world. And yes, we do all have the exact same slot machines. The smallest casino has the exact same slot machine as the largest. And so certainly the gaming is the commodity, but it's the experience, the brand, who those casinos are focused, who they're target audiences that differentiates them, and we do that really, really well in Las Vegas. My peers do that really, really well in Las Vegas. It's a little harder doing that, on the phone, but not impossible. And respectfully, I think a lot of the operators today have the exact same product on their phone, more so than a retail casino. Since Lloyd isn't pitching one of his portfolio companies that I happen to operate, I'll do it. So in Las Vegas, we created a retail casino that's specifically targeting the Latino audience. The first casino in the United States of America created for the Latino community. There's 64 million Americans that identify as Latino. This is not a niche market. This is a huge, fastest growing segment of the US population, period, end of story. And we opened that casino 2 months ago. It's in the same building that a casino I owned and operated for 15 years existed. Nothing's different about the location, and the average win per unit is 2.5 times what it was. Wow. The brand's different, the audience is different. We've done it in an authentic way where the customer knows this is something very special for them. We are also replicating that online with a platform that is specifically designed for the Latino audience, which Lloyd has graciously invested in. Thank you, Lloyd. And something that I think is an example where going after that niche audience will allow us to carve out a piece of the market. Not going head-to-head with DraftKings, FanDuel, and BetMGM for the general population. That isn't going to happen. But finding our sweet spot. And I think that there's many, many others that can find their own sweet spot and start to differentiate their product.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think what makes market segmentation interesting as a wedge in goes back into, again, product, right? Which is how do you layer on additional products for that audience that will be compelling, right? And we've talked about it, that Betty Gaming is an investment that we did. It was mentioned in the last panel, so I'll bring it up. But focused on the female audience, creating a product design aesthetic, an approach that we think can convert in a cost-efficient way and capture a market that's very compelling. I think inevitably it's how do you layer on additional products, market, and create a brand that will be compelling and enduring and grow into something that's much bigger than that initial wedge that you're trying to get.
Does it make a big difference to have iGaming? Because it's very difficult to be competitive when you haven't got that margin.
My personal perspective is when we look at the industry, we are going to look at the maturation similar to what we saw in the video game industry, which is when you look at publicly traded, large-scale publishers, the EAs, the Activisions, the Take-Twos, you have mobile gaming divisions, you have first-person shooter games, you have sports titles, you have real-time strategy, et cetera, right? You can go down the list. This industry will be the exact same way. It will be DFS, sports gambling, player stock markets, games of skill, right? Sweepstakes, lotto, those will continue. There will be consolidation in the market. But in order to continue to grow, attract unique individual audiences that operate essentially what looks like as independent business units, but then effectively trying to draw and cross-promote those users into additional games and figuring out what your sweet spot is there is what is going to create the next multi-billion-dollar entities, right? You see players like IAC coming into the market, right, that have operated and owned conglomerates in a very different way, spun out individually publicly traded companies, the Expedias, the Ticketmasters, the Match Groups. And I think that there's a unique opportunity to do that in this space as well. And so some of those businesses that are owned and operated underneath the umbrella, 3 of them might match and be their own publicly traded business. They might not operate underneath that brand forever, but that's where you're going to see a lot of growth.
So you've got businesses like Fanatics who are just about to make a big splash, I think, on the way in. That kind of endorses that theory. Who else? Just running quickly down the panel, we've got 3 minutes left. Give me a name. Who should we be watching for the next 12 months? Chris.
It's not a new name, but I continue to focus on the Caesars and BetMGMs of the world because I think, we're in the very early days of omni-channel optimization. I think cashless is going to really progress that. So if I look over the course of the next 10 years, the ability to take a VIP player from playing on their phone to New Jersey, pick them up in a limo at the Vegas airport and drive them to a suite at the Bellagio, I don't think that can be replicated, right? And I don't think that customer journey has been perfected yet. So, you know, I continue to look for the casino-centric brands to be big difference makers in the years to come.
Okay.
I think when we look at the M&A market in the U.S., companies that are developing really strong brands will be successful. When you look at the challenges that European incumbents have had to come into the U.S. market and try to establish market share, it hasn't been a great success. And I think in the U.S. market, establishing an incredibly strong brand is important. So I think, yes, profitability, growth, et cetera, but brand is, you know, U.S. are brand loyalists in many ways. And so I think we can't strip out how important developing a solid brand will be from the M&A side. So
it's like the DraftKings yet then?
I would say a combination of branding and authenticity in providing product to one's audience. So Seth did not mention the name, but if you are a fluent Spanish speaker, and even if you are not, jefebet.com is the online instantiation of the casino brand that Seth and his partners run, that I think is a perfect example of something that really speaks directly to a specific audience in a language, both literally and figuratively, that they speak, and that therefore offers opportunity for really outsized outcomes.
Super. And Seth, something else?
Yeah, no, I wish I was that smart and creative. I have to double down. Obviously, I agree with Lloyd emphatically, but I have to agree with Chris. We have not seen any of the dominant casino players truly leverage their retail casinos. MGM is starting to do a great job, and it's not a surprise to me. I'm very intimately familiar. I know, you know, there are people from these properties in the room. I'm very familiar with these operators. They're really good at what they do because they've been doing it for 30, 40, 50 years. Online is brand new and was introduced to these operators in the worst way possible. All right, we're going to legalize sports betting, a new state every 6 months. Go figure out how to go into new markets you've never been, and the legal headaches. I mean, it's a shit show, even for the largest operators with all the resources in the world. That's what's going on today. Massachusetts goes live. We're not going to see any other state, sadly. Maybe Texas, if we all pray at the same time, for a while. The dust will settle. And the operators that are really good, and they exist, and they're mostly in Las Vegas, will do really well. However, even the ones that aren't based in Las Vegas will be able to leverage their playbook. So when MGM and Caesars, you know, finally figure out that omni-channel approach, Penn is going to crush it in the markets where they have a retail casino. Their customer wants to gamble online so that they have the accessibility to their retail casino. It just makes too much sense, and that doesn't exist in Europe. So we can't say, well, why didn't that happen in Europe 20 years ago? It's a different market. So my bet is on the land-based operators.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. That is us done. Food for thought for everyone, and have a good conference.